Everyone. I know a few people are still coming into our room, so I'd like to welcome everyone to the wonderful webinar series that ACCA provides for our administrators across the California community colleges. We have a very, very important topic today on navigating difficult conversations and communicating feedback that builds trust. So we're really delighted to have you all here. We're looking forward to a wonderful hour together. We are going to have, I'm going to give you a little information about ACCA because some of you may not be members, and then share with you a couple of upcoming events, and then I'll tell you how the format of our webinar will work today. So first of all, those of you who are members, thank you for being members, and those of you who are not, please consider joining us. We are a member-supported and member-driven professional organization that advocates and supports the development of our administrators and management across the community colleges. So we have a lot of wonderful benefits for members. These include things like advocacy at the state level, advocacy with partner organizations. We also have things, lots of networking events. I'll mention a couple of those. We just recently published a salary survey of all the different job classifications across California. And we also provide liability insurance as well as legal advice. So these are really wonderful benefits. We hope you'll join us in ACCA. It's a wonderful organization. We have two events coming up, very exciting. First in January, we're going to have our 2026 Budget and Advocacy Workshop, which is held virtually. And that's on January the 14th in 2026. And then we're queuing up for our 50th annual conference for ACCA. It's going to be held in Long Beach, February 18th through 20th. So I hope you'll be able to join us there. In the webinar today, we have a wonderful speaker, Dr. Lonita Cordova, who is our Assistant Superintendent Vice President of Student Services at San Joaquin Delta College. She's going to be presenting, and we're going to allow about 20 minutes at the end for questions and answers. So she'll be presenting, and then we'll be collecting those in the Q&A section. You'll see that across your Zoom bar. So I will join you back in about 35 to 40 minutes, and we would like to warmly welcome Dr. Cordova. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm excited to be here. So for those of you who are on Zoom, I love reactions, so I see them coming now. If there's something that resonates you, feel free to type it in the chat. We do a few webinars, and I think it really helps people to feel engaged when you can interact. Just to echo what Nan said, we will be taking questions at the end. So if you want to, feel free to put it in the Q&A, go ahead and do that. But just know we're not ignoring you. It's just that we need we want to get through the information first, and then we'll take that time to answer your questions. So I'm going to go ahead and share screen and jump on in. This is, as somebody who has a counseling background, I'm licensed as a therapist. Conversations are important. And what I want to start by saying is I'm not an HR expert. I am speaking from a place of being an administrator in different capacities. And so just, trying to give some tips around, I'm going to just make sure real quick before I get started that my sound is on, that, I'm giving you some helpful advice on, some things that are helpful for me. So here we go. All right. So navigating difficult conversations. This was something that I think folks really had an interest in. And so today we'll talk about a mindful approach. I think, for me, the biggest thing that you have to think about when you're having difficult conversations, especially around evaluations, is that assume good intentions, right? So we're going to talk about what a mindful approach means during evaluations, understanding different frameworks, and recognizing that each employee has different needs. There are customers, we support them as managers, as administrators. And so, how do we make sure that not only communication is a two-way street, but that we're being supportive and providing what our employees need to be successful? And then just grounded practices. How do you maintain integrity while fostering development? Understanding that each of our people on our team come in with different skills, knowledge, abilities, tools in their tool belt, as well as life experiences. So in the California community college system, it's very complex. We serve faculty, we serve classified professionals, as well as administrators. And so when we're talking about, doing evaluations, each of those bargaining units, constituent groups has different requirements. So I'm not going to go into the legalese, but I would be remiss if I didn't focus on that with your faculty. Make sure that when you're going through the evaluation process, you're paying attention to the contract, as well as with classified professionals. And things that you want to be thinking about is, are they tenured track? Are they adjuncts? What is due process? Because that can get us into a challenge as administration if we're not mindful of specific requirements, deadlines that we should be tracking or paying attention to. And then with our classified professional, are they probationary? That's important because you're going to have different conversations with somebody who's permanent, maybe than somebody who's in a probationary status. Are you paying attention to due process again in regards to what protections or support maybe your classified professionals need? With administrators, depending on what institution that you're in, they may have a contract. So you might be focusing on strategic leadership development with that person, keeping in mind that they are at will. March 15th is a deadline that you maybe need to meet depending on what the goal is or where you are within your evaluation process and the skills or remediation that this person might need from a support system perspective. And then as far as institutional impact and growth, where does this person fit within the organization and within your team? So that's about as far as I'm going to go in regards to the HR pieces of this. I really want to jump into communication. When you're doing evaluations, I think of it as a sandwich. Start with positive statements first. And then then you can talk about growth opportunities. And then you want to end on a positive note where you can. So with more positive, strength-based comments. And I'll give you some examples about that. When we think about, our jobs, many of us are in this work because we want to change students' lives. We want to help. We want to make a difference. And so I think if you can use that lens when you're having difficult conversations, that can be helpful. I know for me personally, I always try to think of something positive. And we know that we have employees that can be a challenge. There are certain folks within your departments or on your campuses that you have a visceral response to in a negative way when they're a part of meetings. And so it may be helpful to kind of imagine something positive about that person, whether they're wearing nice shoes or, just if you can try to find something positive that helps to change your energy and how you interact with that person. I think that's a helpful tool within the evaluation process as well. So how do I create an opportunity for this to be a positive interaction with my personnel? Understanding responses. Oftentimes when we think of challenges, how do we turn those into developmental opportunities? So, we all have our strengths. I'm an extrovert. I've had to build capacity in, paying attention to details, maybe, focusing on specific information. So, being aware of that, like how do we look at what the person's strengths are and think about with where they lie within the institution, are they working from a strength-based perspective? When you're thinking of development and planning, to provide support from a remediation perspective, how do I set up milestones, short-term goals that lead to positive outcomes? And we're going to talk more about this as we go through the presentation, but these are just some guiding principles that we'll be highlighting as we go through this webinar today. And then growth framing. We talk about growth mindset with our students. We should be with our employees as well. So not wherever possible, not using a deficit mindset. And, it's important to look at those growth opportunities, but how do we reframe it for that person so they don't feel beat up or that's all that we're focusing on? And that leads to thoughtful communication. Like, how are we developing? I think from a professional development perspective with our faculty, partnering with constituent groups to really provide opportunities to leverage strengths for our academic contributions for our students. And then with our classified professionals, how are we making sure that they're meeting their demonstrated competencies, especially when, technology is changing, job descriptions change. If somebody was hired 20, 30 years ago, they might have a skill set that's not maybe needed anymore or has morphed or changed in a specific way. So how are you incorporating those duties and responsibilities and providing training, support, to upskill that person? What does that look like? And then just supportive language. We know that change is hard. And so, how do we come from a place of collaboration and development versus, as I said before, that deficit mindset? Really integrating a growth mindset within the team as well. So I have a video that I thought was funny. Oftentimes we think we're communicating in a way. I've had this happen to me in some of my performance evaluations, and just being mindful of the language that we use. You this person is coming in and it's a very vulnerable type situation. I even liken it to going to therapy, right? You're coming in to be evaluated by your supervisor. And sometimes maybe you don't see your supervisor as much as you'd like to. Maybe you're behind the scenes, you're doing data input, and they're providing you feedback on what their perception of your work is. And I've had people tell me before, well, I don't give, exceeds expectations because everybody's a work in progress. Be mindful of what that feels like. If you feel that you're a hard evaluator, and I would challenge you to think about, like, not everybody's going to exceed expectations, but what is your standard? How do you quantify it? And how does that make that person feel? So this is a fun video that kind of puts this into word, and just take it as a moment to reflect. Let's see. Maybe. Ooh. Oh, the video's not playing now. All right, let me just check my settings real quick to make sure that I didn't forget to hit something. I apologize, bear with me. Let's see. Dance, share sound. All right, I'm going to try it again. If not, I'll keep moving forward. All right, let's see if it'll play from here. Alex, could this be a setting? Oh, let's see, enable content. All right, let me try it now. Okay. Let's try it from here.
If you want to send me the link, we'll be
Okay,
sure
we
to
can
include
include
it.
it. Okay.
Oh wait.
Here we go. Let's see what happens.
Your performance has been excellent. Thank you. No, seriously, I appreciate everything you do. You never call out. You always stay late when we need you to. I think we would literally fall apart without you. Thank you for noticing. For these reasons, you have earned a meets expectations on your annual performance review. Keep up the good work. I'm sorry, I think you meant to say exceeds expectations. No, I put you down as meets expectations. But you were just saying how valuable I am to this company. How am I not exceeding expectations? You're a key part of this company, but I don't give anybody higher than meets expectations. Why? Because there's always room for improvement, and this will motivate you to work even harder. Will there at least be any salary increases this year? Only for employees that exceed expectations. But you just said nobody gets that rating. Correct. Well, that's all I got. Can you call Alex to come in here? He's next. Sure. Hey, Christian, can you stay late today? No, thanks. Why not? Well, based on my performance review, it's time I start acting my wage and only meet expectations. So I'll be clocking out at 5 today. But we really need the help, and I really need a raise. Let me know if you want to reevaluate. Your performance.
So I thought that was it's kind of, making a joke about it. But think about, as you're providing feedback to people, how are you validating the hard work that they do? To say I don't exceed expectations for somebody who really is coming in and you've said you do an amazing job. We couldn't live without you. You have this expertise that, it's just, priceless. And then to give them a meets expectations, that feeling, right? People don't care about what you say. It's how you make them feel that's really important. So just be mindful of that. When you talk about ongoing support, every one-to-one interaction is an opportunity for feedback. You never want to blind somebody in their evaluation and you didn't share with them that you had a concern about something. So for example, maybe somebody is late on an ongoing basis. When you meet with them in a one-to-one, are you saying, hey, I really want to have a conversation about your tardiness or your attendance? I'm really concerned because I noticed that on these dates, you've been, showing up tardy. Is there something that you need from me to support you? So notice I offered support in that conversation because we don't know what our employees are going through. And if we come in with a lens of assuming good intentions, then it allows us to explore and provide a safe space for folks to maybe share some of the challenges that they're going through. Maybe there's something personal that they're not saying or sharing that you can provide support to them for. As far as growth opportunities go, performance improvement plans are structured to support. So I always look at it like if there's a remediation that needs to take place, I'm going to be introspective as a leader first. I'm going to think about, am I providing this person with the knowledge, skills, and abilities that they need to get the job done? Do they need resources? Are there certain things that they're trying to do and they don't have the tools that they need? So, for example, could I nail a nail in the wall with a high heel shoe? Absolutely. But a hammer is going to work 10 times better. So, is my team working with a high heel shoe and I don't recognize it because I'm not offering support, or maybe I need to evaluate or do a survey to figure out, do they have the resources that they need to get their job done? Once you've done that type of introspection, then if the person you've tried to remediate, you've had conversations, ongoing conversations, you might want to bake in some type of accountability process. So what that would look like is I'm meeting with my employee weekly. They're always late. I bring it up in the meeting or in our one-to-one, and I still notice there's a problem, even though maybe if they do have a personal problem, try to offer support. If they don't have a personal problem and they just say, I hate waking up in the morning, try to figure out, okay, so what is a strategy for you to get here on time? How can I support you? If they say there's nothing you can do and they continue to be late, then you need to think about what are some ways that you could help them. Is it a time management problem? If it's time management, then what we might talk about is, okay, so I'm noticing that you're late. I follow up with an email, Stacy, you're late again today. We talked about this in our one-to-one that you were going to show up to work and make sure that you were ready to go when, 8 o'clock hits. And that's not happening. When you do that, there's a negative impact on the department because you're not able to get your work done and somebody has to pick up those responsibilities. I think it's important to talk about the impact so that the person understands that they're a team or they're a part of an organization. If the problem continues, depending on if this is a manager, a faculty, or classified, you might have to involve having conversations with constituent groups if it rises to that level. But you're going to continue to want to support. So now we're at a place maybe where during the evaluations, it's continuing to happen, and I'm moving towards a performance improvement plan due to constant tardiness. They're behind on their work. They're not getting things done, which underlying would be a time management problem. There are LinkedIn learning videos that you can use, and you can say, okay, we're putting you on a 60-day performance improvement plan. I'm going to meet with you weekly to follow up on your progress, and you do a 30-minute check-in. It's going to be your responsibility to provide me with updates on, and then you're going to say completing a LinkedIn learning on time management, how to manage your calendar so that you're completing your tasks and showing up on time. That's then now the ball's in your court as the administrator to follow through on that. And this is where it is a lot of work, but the hope is upon completion of that 60 days, the person is off of that performance improvement plan because you've supported them in a way that they're successful. So I would frame any time that you're having these kind of conversations from a supportive lens. And then following up, as I said, you want to have ongoing check-ins. You want to provide that person ongoing feedback. And then you might formally say, hey, great job. You've been meeting these expectations. And because of that, I'm really proud of the work that you're doing, blah, 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 right? So those are key pieces in helping a person to be successful. I think it's important to cultivate awareness. You want to talk about these kind of things with your team. Be clear with your expectations. There's nothing worse than holding somebody accountable for something that you didn't clarify or maybe you weren't clear about. So I think that evaluations are a two-way street. I think as a leader, it's important to check in with your team as well to say, hey, is there anything I can do to support you? Do you feel that my communication is working for you? Because everybody, we're humans. We take a multimodal approach to education and instruction. I think it is helpful to also take a multimodal approach to your administration and your leading. So don't assume as a leader that everybody should be communicating in your style. We work with diverse people from diverse backgrounds and experiences. For some people, they may be an introvert. They may need you to send them an agenda ahead of time so that they can come in prepared to your meetings, so that they have a time to process and think. That would be the same with an evaluation process and having challenging conversations. We don't want to blindside somebody. They may not be an on-the-spot thinker. So continuous development and cultivating that culture of awareness and that growth and support is important. Remember that as in your one-to-ones, things might be built upon. So you might want to maybe put something as a standing agenda item to follow up with the person and pay attention to what their needs are. I think getting to know your team is important so that when you're having those difficult conversations, they know that you're coming from a place of good intentions. And then just being consistent with your presence. I think regular check-ins are important. There's nothing worse than having something on your agenda that you need to address with your supervisor and they keep canceling your one-to-one meetings. Be mindful of that because that might be the only time that they have with you to do check-ins, to get guidance from you, to get feedback. And so those are just things that we can take accountability for as leaders so that if we have to have those challenging conversations, we've built a foundation of trust and communication so that the person feels as though they're being supported. In regards to administrator development, and this can be for ourselves as well, making sure that, within our agenda or within the way that we're communicating, are we aligning everything that we do with our strategic goals? What is the impact on our students and our department? And then are we creating positive momentum? I think a part of the evaluation process that we don't often talk about is those expectations. So is your team clear with what is required of them? And if not, sometimes that's where things go run amok is because your team doesn't understand what's expected of them and it's all over the place. So these are ways that I think help with challenging conversations because you mitigate a lot of that stress by being clear with what the roles are, what the goals are, so that when we meet now, I'm able to check in with you and see how you're doing as a human. But we're also, we all also have a clear understanding of our momentum points and our milestones and where we're trying to go. So you could develop a toolkit to think about, some of the things that we've talked about, the continuous practice. How do you make sure that you honor those one-to-ones, set them on a calendar, create an agreed upon time to do those regular check-ins and have regular conversations? I think that's our duty as a leader. Because for some of our classified professionals specifically, we may not get a lot of time to interact with them. I'll say at the vice president level, it's harder and harder for me. My meetings are back to back. How am I walking through office spaces to observe? Because evaluation doesn't just happen once a year. It should be ongoing. It should be through check-ins, but it should be also me walking around, getting to know people, seeing what's going on, seeing what's working and what's not working. I am a part of the Welcome Center reports to me. I do my best to walk through there to see is customer service positive? Is the vibe in the Welcome Center positive? Are students being engaged in a way that they feel seen, heard, connected, and a sense of belonging? How are the staff? What is the morale like for the staff? I won't know that by sitting in my office. So I think evaluation has to be getting out there and taking a temperature check within your own campuses to know what's going on. People feel that and they notice when you're out and about and walking around. So we've talked about regular meetings, trying not to cancel your check-ins, walking around and observing. That's all a part of the evaluation process that will help when you have to have those challenging conversations because you've built a rapport and you're kind of creating a leadership style that's built on trust, which I think is key. When we think about the growth mindset, these are all growth opportunities. We are human. And if in those meetings, when I'm having those conversations, I can say, I need to work, I know that I'm not perfect and these are things that I'm working on. You help to soften the delivery of maybe, you're not meeting expectations in this area. And I'll go back to this is where your regular check-ins can be helpful because nobody should be blindsided within their evaluation process. Focusing on their potential rather than their limitations. We do need to address limitations. And so, asking questions is helpful. And what that could look like is, the person walks into the evaluation and you say, hey, what are some positive things that you've done? Tell me about how you feel that your year has gone. What are some things that you're proud of? And then you ask them, now provide me some feedback on things that you need support on, or where are some areas that you feel are growth opportunities for you? You'd be surprised at how honest some people will be, and how hypercritical maybe they are with themselves. And then that sustained support. So follow up and continuous support is essential. If you put somebody, if you're holding somebody accountable, it's your responsibility as a leader to check in with them. It's like project management. We don't just assign a task and then not follow up to make sure the person has what they need to be successful. I think that's the piece that kind of falls off because we get busy in our day to day, but that's where we have a personal accountability ourselves to check in. We should be adjusting the support based on progress. If attending a time management seminar didn't work, then maybe we need to go a little bit more aggressive with, not aggressive, that's not a nice word, but like we need to be a little bit more intrusive with getting them connected with other resources. Maybe it's mentorship. Maybe it's attending some type of leadership series, or sending them, to a professional development seminar that will help them to remediate that specific area. And then being consistent with checking in on them, observing, so that you're constantly being that support system that they may need. So now we're going to dig a little bit deeper into, what are some techniques for communication? Why is it important to be clear? I'll say document, 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 and not to be a jerk, but I think that it's important because I might say something and someone hears it one way, but when I put it in writing, then it really sinks in. We are multimodal people. Some of us are auditory learners, some are visual, some are kinesthetic, and some people need more time to think about and process. So I would say following up with an email after a challenging conversation is important, because not only are you documenting it, but you're expressing to them what the need is. And what does that email communication look like? Well, in our conversation, we talked about the growth opportunity for you to show up to work on time. And we talked about like staying in there. How does that impact your team if you don't follow through on being on time and somebody else has to pick up your workload? And then what is the remediation plan? And then you can end it with, please let me know if you have any questions or concerns, or if there's other things that you need for me to support you, right? Now I've got that documentation. I think it's an important way to then, you can always bring up those emails later if you need to and say, look, I tried to provide a supportive opportunity. Help me to understand, is there something more that I need to do? Within challenging conversations, I statements are helpful. Instead of saying you did this, you did that, saying, I observed this or I observed that. And so this is my interpretation of the situation, and allowing the person to provide feedback. Ask them, is this your understanding of what occurred? Is there something more that I can do to provide support? Distinguish between performance, conduct, and operational challenges, I think is key. Because if it's a performance issue, you're going to handle it very different than if they've done something that is egregious enough to violate conduct. So that's where you're going to have to work with HR and kind of analyze, is it an operational challenge? When we talk about operational challenges, that's that they don't have the tools or resources that they need to do their job correctly. And we really want to identify that, because we don't want to punish somebody for an operational challenge. When maybe it's that we didn't know or realize that they needed something. And then strategies for complex developmental needs. We'll talk a little bit about that later, but each person is going to have an individualized need. We can't treat all of our employees the same and expect that they're going to be able to thrive, because they're going to have different skills, abilities, and needs. So when we talk about performance issues, we talked about identifying where they come from. There could be skill gaps. Often, we come in, and I'll say we, meaning I'll use myself as an example, where we've implemented this computer system. We expect that training has happened, but we know that sometimes consultants come in and they do these really broad trainings. And then we expect our teams to roll out these fill in the blank wonderful, it's going to fix everything technology system. But if they didn't get the training that they need, there could be a gap in their skills or their knowledge. So I think you have to pause and assess, is this a performance issue, or is it that they have a gap in their knowledge because I've implemented something and now I'm expecting them to be able to do something they haven't been trained on or don't have the resources for? When we talk about a conduct issue, is it a behavioral violation? Did they breach a policy? Did they do something more egregious? Assessment questions. What is the issue? What support is needed? What is the desired outcome? And how are we going to measure that progress? You're going to have to play a key part in that. With some of our employees, they don't have the knowledge, skills, and ability to think from that perspective. They're there to do the operational support. And this isn't a slight to anybody, but I think that it's where, as leaders, we have to be accountable for some of that. And then are there operational deficits, systems failures, resource limitations, budget challenges? You know, right now there's a lot of changes that are taking place and they're coming in quick. So how do we recognize whether these are some of the problems? Because each of these challenges should be addressed differently. And some of them are not the employee's fault. So we want to make sure that we're not holding somebody accountable for something that they're not responsible for or that's not fair. So when we talk about the assessment phase, let's move into performance issue navigation. If you have that challenging employee, we talked about identifying where the performance challenge is. We want to think about the assessment phase. Is it 30-day performance improvement? Is it 60 or 90 days? We want to create a plan that is very prescriptive. So within your performance improvement plan, you want to say that during your evaluation, it was identified that you have a time management problem, that you have a operational, there are operational or knowledge deficits based on these areas. Maybe they don't understand business processes within admissions and records and they're inputting data incorrectly, right? And they've been trained and they're not showing up to their trainings. That's where you want to be really prescriptive. You will attend one training per month through the admissions and records department. You will do these things. And then your part of it would be then I will follow up with you one time a week for 30 minutes to see if there are any resources needed for you to move forward. I'm not going to harp on the root cause analysis because we've talked about that. And then development planning. So this is where you want to get creative. You want to think about LinkedIn Learning. You want to think about, we used to have Linda as a training platform. What are some ways that you can provide that person with support? And then you want to give a clear deadline. You will complete 3 LinkedIn Learning trainings on time management within these 90 days. One of them will be done in the first month, the second one in the second month, the third one in the third month, and we're going to put dates in there. And then you're going to want to calendar those dates to check in with the person. Here's what I'll say. If you drop the ball, it's going to create challenges for you because you're not following the performance improvement plan and you're empowering that employee now to say you didn't provide them with the support needed. So just be mindful of, go as you mean to, or is it, anyway, following, if you create a plan, follow it. If you set up deadlines and check-in times, do everything that you can in your power to make sure that you meet those timelines and that you follow through on those check-ins, because now you're walking the walk and talking the talk, right? And then that implementation support. So you're going to maybe need to adjust your approach based on that person's progress. So if it's a conduct issue, we're going to shift gears a little bit, because if it's a safety issue, if it's Title IX sexual harassment, there is due process that you're going to need to follow. You're going to want to connect HR now into this process, and you want to make sure that you're protecting the complainant and the respondent, depending on what's happening, and take corrective action accordingly. So we're not going to go too much into detail. This is as much as I'm going to touch on this one. But when it comes to conduct, my recommendation is work with HR. Make sure that you're following your contract, and then look at your district's policies and procedures, because that's where we get into a lot of sticky situations as administration, is when we violate our own policy and process. Sometimes you need to go slow to go fast, meaning that you may want to get a legal opinion on something. because you might innocently or naively step into a puddle or a mess because you didn't pause and you kind of have a knee-jerk reaction to a situation or conduct issue. So I'm going to play, this one is in that performance review, really being clear and explicit with what your expectations are. You're going to want to write it out. There's a manual called FRISK, FRISK. Work with your HR team to get that, because it gives you some tools in that you can use from a document perspective, because you really want to make sure that the person understands. And so I'm going to share this video with you. It's another one that's kind of silly, but it's an example of what you say may not be what the other person hears.
So that was my weekend, nothing special. What about you? You seem rather chipper for a Monday.
Today is a good day. It's my performance review.
Wait a minute. You're excited about the performance review?
My next meeting is a one-on-one. I have to deliver a performance review.
That's not necessarily a bad thing.
It's with Matt.
Oh, I can see why you're so depressed.
Man, I'm stoked about this one. Because last time Melanie gave me kind of a bad review.
Last time I gave him an extremely negative review.
What exactly did she say?
You know, mumbo-jumbo manager speak.
I couldn't have been more clear.
Like needing a little touch-up here and there.
His appearance was sloppy, he was passive and unmotivated.
Maybe learn some more stuff.
And the quality of his work was completely substandard.
And we talked about my future.
I also said that I didn't see much of a future for him.
Dude, you have to read between the lines, but she was majorly hinting that I could go places.
I don't think he's gonna make it to the end of the year anyway.
With a little spit and polish, no big deal. So that's what I did. Got myself some spit and polish. Buddy, you're looking at Mr. Improved.
If anything, he's gotten worse. I don't know which is more objectionable, his social deficiencies or his technical incompetencies.
I mean, I busted my hump this last year. I even took some night classes at the community college.
I can see why you're so enthused about things.
It's more than that. I think I'll finally get that promotion I deserve. And believe me, with a new baby on the way, I could use all the cash I could get.
I'm putting Matt on probation, and that means no yearly bonus, but fortunately I hear his wife has a good job.
Especially with my wife losing her job and all.
Sorry to hear about that, mate. Tell you what, you give me a call after the review and we'll celebrate over lunch or something.
Yay.
Okay.
Cheerio.
Well, call me for lunch later. I have a feeling you're gonna need to take a break.
Well, Matt, are you ready?
You bet. Now, I'm jumping the gun a little bit here, I know. And maybe it's just nerves because my wife lost her job and all. But you'll see I deserve that promotion.
Promotion?
Yes. And I have you to thank. You know that little pep talk last time? And with being a new daddy and all. Anyway, I'm just so excited to hear what you have to say.
Facing a crucial conversation? Crucial Learning can help.
So I think, it's kind of makes light of a situation, but this is why it's important to document and check in, because he walked away from that evaluation with a completely different lens or based on the intent, right? Intent versus impact is huge. Your intentions might be positive, but the impact on that person might hit completely differently. So I would say that's where following up in writing and those check-ins are key. Had she checked in with him along the way after that evaluation to make sure that there was understanding, that he was meeting the milestones, I think it could have helped to mitigate some of that misunderstanding so that he's not walking into that meeting thinking he's getting a raise and a promotion. And in her mind, it wasn't working, right? There's a breakdown in communication somewhere that he didn't understand. So when you're in the meeting and you're having to give that hard, or you're having those challenging conversations, it's important for you to be in a place where you're calm from a somatic perspective, meaning within yourself. You want to create a place that's safe and supportive. Some people, their identity is tied to their work. So you're going to want to help them to regulate their emotions, talk through, this is really a hard conversation, validating for them. It's not easy to hear this feedback, but I'm here to support you. It's not easy to have these conversations, but I'm here to provide you with the tools and resources that you need because I want to make sure that you're successful. You may have to have a pre-conversation preparation. So what does that checklist look like? making sure that your conversations are ongoing. Like we've said in this seminar, nobody wants to be blindsided in an evaluation. So are you communicating these challenges or deficits ahead of time? You want to make sure that in each conversation afterwards with your check-in that you're reviewing their performance. Are you providing them with information, clarifying your intentions, supportive language, and then resource planning? What tools, training, or opportunities do you need to be successful? And then following through on that follow-up piece. When it comes to challenging employees, depending on how defensive they may be or resistant, you might need to have HR in the room. That's okay too. Or they may request their union member. So be, mindful of that. But I would say you have the right to table a conversation if it's going sideways. So you might want to, just be prepared that if the conversation isn't fruitful, if the person is overly emotional, you might pause and say, I know this information is hard to hear. And now that you're on a performance improvement plan, you might need some time to process this. I'm going to allow you to, take this paperwork, read through it. Let's meet again next week, so that I can provide you with support. Because not everybody is in that moment processor or thinker, and they may need some time, especially if they really care and they're becoming emotional because they feel bad about what's happening. Some other things to think about come from a place of curiosity. You're the leader in the room. Being defensive isn't helpful. So you might want to say, help me understand where you're coming from, right? That's a good one. Or coming from a place of curiosity. I'm curious. You say that you are always late and, that, you're comparing yourself to, or because, you have a hard time getting up in the morning. This negatively impacts your team. So, I'm curious to know, what if you were the one that got here on time and you were having to pick up somebody else's work? How would you feel about that, right? So I'm trying to give them an opportunity to think about how their decisions and choices impact other people. And then, if they're becoming overwhelmed or anxious, you may need to offer them support. We have EAP, employee assistance programs. They might be going through something personally. Are you providing them with mental health support, connections to accommodations, things like that? You're going to want to be ready to go with those types of resources as well when you're navigating hard conversations. So when we think of, support, you have low levels of support versus higher levels of support. Check-ins, that should be your standard, right? You should be doing that all the time. Resources are the next thing. Coaching is important. And then if it's really a challenging situation, what specialized remediation does that person need? And if you think of it from a perspective of our students, it's no different. And I'm not trying to be flippant about that. We're all human beings. If we go above and beyond for our students, we should be doing the same for our employees. We are human beings first and foremost. So I would say, you want to think about what the need is and then match that need from that perspective. When we talk about resources, are they aware of HR resources? What EAP programs are in place? Do they need any extra type of coaching or mentorship? And then what system level support exists? Are there any resources necessary or enhancements that need to happen? Because we talked about technology. What streamlined workflow processes can I provide support for? Am I creating a collaborative solution? And then measuring, are they on track to meet those performance improvement plan goals? It's a shared responsibility. And I think that if you're doing this in a way that's collaborative, people really do feel supportive. They feel seen, heard, connected, and a sense of belonging. And that helps to help institutions to move forward in a positive direction. So that concludes my PowerPoint, but we're gonna move into the Q&A. So Nan's gonna help me here with navigating some of the questions and answers, and I'll do my best to help answer anything that I can answer.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Cordova. We really appreciate that. So I'll go ahead and start with a question. I'd love any feedback on how to address one's personality I have with a student-facing employee. I am operating on an assumption, which I know I shouldn't, but I feel they likely identify as being introverted. They are also very direct, and my opinion can come across as curmudgeonly. to others. They have good intent, but sometimes students feel they're being treated negatively. I don't want to offend and come across as judging their personality or appear to be forcing them to present themselves in a manner that doesn't coincide with their personality. Any suggestions on how to encourage reflection and navigate that type of conversation would be appreciated.
Great. I think that's a great question. That's where we were talking about coming from a place of a growth mindset for folks. So I would say, depending on your relationship with that person, if you're getting feedback from students, maybe you talk about, so I'm always a believer in doing team development. So we might do a training around customer service and what that looks like when you're forward facing, sitting at a front desk. And then when I do my check-in with that person, I would, in a private setting, say to them, I'm going to use you, Nan. Nan, can I provide you with some feedback that I've been getting from students? Are you aware that some of the students feel as though you're short with them or, blah, 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 and kind of mirror back or give them kind of themes that you hear from student feedback. If they say yes, students come in unprepared, and they get defensive, we might want to have a conversation about, well, help me understand, you're working at the front counter. Is that something you enjoy doing? What are you passionate about? What do you like to do? Because that could initiate a conversation where they say, I hate working at that desk. And then it's easy because then you could say, well, what if we found a different location for you? What would your ideal location be? And maybe there's some conversations around switching folks around and putting that person that is that forward-facing person in that role.
Thank you so much. So we have another great question here. How, who, and when does an evaluation happen for an employee on a temporary out-of-class placement? Are they treated as if they're a new employee?
So that's a good HR question. Every institution is different. But I think providing temporary folks with feedback is important. I think you could do that in your check-in meetings informally. If there's deficits there that you're concerned about, depending on if that person's going to go for the full-time job or not, it could be helpful for them to get some feedback. So I think it's appropriate in an informal way. And then I would just follow up with HR to see what your policies and procedures are around temporary employees and an evaluation process.
Great, thank you. We have another wonderful question. What are strategies for checking in or being consistent when you have too many direct reports, more than 15?
That's a tough one. So what you could do is, I think you can check in with people through surveys. I think there's ways to do it, formally and informally. And maybe even if it's 15 minutes. So I'm with you. Like something else that helps folks to feel seen, heard, connected are listening tours, where you don't have managers in the room. You meet with your classified team and you allow them to have conversations with you about what are, you can always guide the questions. What resources or tools do you need? Do you feel that you have what you need to get your job done? What are challenges or sticking points? And then you can try to address it that way. Or you could set up, make it a commitment each semester to, if it's 15 people, meet with 5 a month. And maybe it's just a 15-minute check-in. You provide them with a list of what you're asking for or suggestions, or you allow them to submit them ahead of time so that you can really optimize those 15 minutes.
Thank you. So another participant said, Dr. Cordova, thank you for this webinar. I love your neutral and humane approach to leadership. How would you approach managers who lack introspection, empathy, or training in management, which leads to low morale and toxic work environments and violations of labor contracts?
Oof. I would say, that one is, you can't teach some of it, right? So that's where you go through all the things that I talked about. And then that's where ongoing feedback is going to be important, right? Within your check-ins, you can say, well, help me understand, I'm noticing that you can ask them to come in, like do a reflective activity. And if they don't follow through with it, say, well, I asked you to do this and I'm not seeing that you reflected upon where some of your, growth opportunities are. Can I provide you feedback? And that's where you're going to just have to be honest. To do this work, you have to do the work on yourself. To be this role, these jobs are hard. People are always wanting to give you opinions, feedback, and it hurts, but I have to listen to it and be able to absorb it and try to grow and change. And so having that conversation, if they're still not, doing what they need to do, 360 evaluations can help because you can get feedback from their people who report to them. And then maybe you triangulate those themes and say, within your area, I got feedback that your communication style is this way, that you don't listen to your team, they don't feel supported. How can I help you in improving that? Now we're going performance improvement plan route, right? You can do off-cycle evaluations and then put them on a 90-day performance improvement, and then help them by remediating. There's a point where if someone's doing more harm than good, then you have to have those difficult conversations. And then I would include HR to make sure that you're doing everything that you can. And we jokingly say sometimes people need a nice warm glass of cocoa, choose other career options because, hurt people hurt people. And if you're not healthy within an institution, then it can be damaging. And you have a responsibility as a leader to support all of your team. So I think that that's where it does get difficult. But, if you've done everything ethically that you can do to support that person, then you have to be okay with drawing that fine line.
That's a very powerful answer. Thank you. So here's another great question. Could you talk about managing up or what to do when you disagree or have different thoughts than your manager?
Whew, that's another good one. So I think that's where you agendize. You make sure that when you go into the meetings that you're prepared to ask questions. I'll say this, a lot of times when I go in and I get a no, I can ask, is this a no, like a permanent no, or just not right now? Can you help me understand where you're coming from with this no? It would be very, and just using curious language with your boss to understand where they're coming from. Because I'll share at different areas of the organization, sometimes we just don't have the same lens or we're using a different lens than our supervisors. As a director, I would always say, when I'm a dean, I'm going to do this, this, and this, and this. And then when I was a dean, I kind of got an understanding of why my dean operated the way they did. Same thing in this vice president role. I oftentimes watched some of my prior supervisors and I was like, oh, I wonder why they're doing this. Well, now that I'm in this role, I have a different lens. And if you think of it from a movie theater, the dance floor is where you're operational and you're out there dancing. Each level that you move up, you get a different lens and you're observing different things going on within that organization. So sometimes there has to be the trust there that maybe something else is going on. If not, then I would say, do you feel comfortable having a challenging conversation with your boss to say, look, I'm really feeling unheard in this situation. Can we explore ways to communicate better? Can we explore ways for me to be successful? Or you can flip it and say, can I share with you what I need to be successful from you? And see if they're open to it. And then, then that's where you might have to have a hard conversation with yourself. Are your values aligned with your institution and your department and where you are? And are you going to have to kind of explore other opportunities?
Thank you. Here's another question. What do you suggest for a situation where a correction to performance is time sensitive or has a deadline? For example, the college might have a need for a specific skill to be mastered by a certain time. How would you recommend making that explicitly clear to the employee without putting undue stress on that situation?
Whew.
These are great questions.
These are good questions. So I think for me, I always would try to come from including that person. You don't want to feel like things are being done to you, right? So I would come from a supportive place. The institution is wanting to implement this software system. We're going to be providing training on these key dates. Please make sure that you're there on these training opportunities because it's going to be key in us hitting those milestones and deadlines. And then you're going to need to check in with them after each one of those training dates to see, do you feel like you're learning this? Do you need more, more support? How can I support you? And I would document that you're checking in with that person. If they say, yes, I'm getting it, I understand it. How do you then make sure that they're mastering what they said? Maybe following up with their supervisor. Is it a workload or, workflow thing? Can you look at measuring your processing 7 applications an hour? Or is there something measurable that you can integrate? Because that could help the person so then they know what the target is. And then just making them aware, like, this is the deadline. I need you to hit this mark. What are your thoughts? What are your concerns? Allow them to express what their concerns are so that you have it on your radar and then do your best to support them through that process.
Great, thank you. All right, here's another one. What advice do you have when someone receives feedback, constructive criticism for the first time in an evaluation? I think this is they're receiving the information.
I mean, I think for us as humans, sometimes it's hard to hear. You have the right to ask questions. You have the right to say, "Can you give me examples of this situation?" Um, and then I would even take some time to process. Mental health days are a thing. So if you've had a hard evaluation, you may need to go home for the day. You may need to call your mentors. I have we talk about it in some of our presentations, my Square Squad. So it's a group of people that I can call, phone a friend, and get some feedback. Do you have a friend within the department that you trust that is going to give you that honest feedback to say, I agree with that feedback that you got, right? I think we have to be introspective first. And if it's just wrong, then you need to, provide proof or any data that you have to say, I'd like to bring in my own evidence, help me understand where this is coming from. Because sometimes, if like we talked about a walking leadership style, going out observing, sometimes communication doesn't make it up. And, if you're not managing up and highlighting some of the work that you're doing, your boss may not know that you're doing it. So maybe that could be what the conversation is, making sure that they're aware of what highlights that you might want to say. Like, I don't agree with this evaluation. You said that I didn't turn my reports in on time, but here's my timestamp that I did. Here's proof, and evidence, and I've done these things. And then, allow them to rebut or to respond. And then, there comes a point where maybe you have to explore what your rights are if you feel targeted or, that you're not being heard within that work environment.
Okay, so we still have a lot of questions, so we're going to get through. I think we have time for one more. So on those topics on your last slides, addressing reducing barriers, would you address those or outreach to division chairs and counseling to address those issues of workflows?
Could you say that one more time?
Yes, on those topics on your last slide, addressing reducing barriers, would you address those or outreach to division chairs and counseling to address those issues of workflows, et cetera?
Looking on my last slide just to see when we talk about workflow. Well, I think that's where systemic improvements can happen. You might want to hold a strategic planning retreat with those teams, have them put on big giant stickies where their sticking points are, where there's workflow problems, and then take it back and start to, with your managers or your team, figure out like, how do we provide solutions to those? How do we set realistic expectations for workflow? For example, if it's an evaluation problem and we know we have a backlog, what steps can we take to mitigate that backlog? And then what's our target time for evaluation? If it's taking us 3 to 6 months, how do we get to 2 weeks? And then putting a plan in place where your team is included in those conversations and you can manage or gauge specifically what the reality is in that workflow. Because sometimes we have a thought like, oh, well, it should only take you this long. But if I'm having to use 5 software systems and my supervisor doesn't realize that, then maybe there's, a miscommunication that's happening and the expectations or goals are not realistic because of that workflow problem. I hope I answered that. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So I want to thank you, Dr. Cordova, for this wonderful webinar. For those of you who are in the audience, she's fabulous, as you can tell.
Thank you.
We have a survey that will come out to you, and there's an information in the chat regarding our 50th annual conference. So thank you again, everyone. Look forward to our next webinar. The next one that will come out is one that's put on by one of our sponsors, so you'll see details about that. So stay tuned for all of these wonderful ACCA events. And for those of you who have questions that we didn't get to, we'll take a look at them. They guide us in terms of our topics for additional webinars. Thank you very, very much, everyone. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you.